Hey guys, this is Matt. I wanted to do a quick video today talking about budget system upgrades, specifically for hard drives. So I recently was researching SSDs to see what I wanted to upgrade on my own system, which is a fairly budget mid-range system from 2018. And a lot of the reviews you read strictly talk about the fastest on the market, the quickest, the best, and the cost associated with that. What they don't talk about is what it looks like when you use those drives or try to use a newer drive in an older system. So that's what I wanted to talk about today, and maybe give some options on choices that you can have if you run an older system. So just to intro, here's the system that we're talking about. I built the system in 2018. At the time it had the Ryzen 2200G, which was very budget. It was $99. I've since upgraded to a 5600G when the prices dropped. Motherboard is a B450, so again that's an older chipset, but they released an update to allow the use of the new Ryzen 5000 series. So that's a great upgrade path for somewhat of an old motherboard. And a lot of people with these B450s, B550s, maybe even a gen prior to that, are in the same boat. They can get a relatively modern CPU, but their motherboard is older. So then we come down through the rest of the components, and here's what I want to talk about. So in my case, I had a Samsung 970 EVO, which was a great M.2 SSD at the time. It was only a 250 gig because the higher capacities were pricey. That was my boot drive. Then I have a Serial ATA hard drive for data, which wasn't much used. However, these are slow. And now that prices have absolutely plummeted on SSDs, I figured this would be a great time to upgrade this. However, let's look at my upgrade path. I only have a single M2 slot on this motherboard, and that is a Gen 3. So again, at the time, this is what was available and was fast and still is, but there's just one slot, so I can't just buy a second and add it to the system. Then I have the graphics slot for the graphics card. And we have a PCIe x4 slot at PCIe 2.0 speeds. And that's it. You have a ×1, but you can't do any expansion with that. So they do make expansion cards to adapt an X4, X8 slot for an M.2 format drive. And I'm going to show test results because I did purchase one of those. And I can show what that means running at 2.0 speeds. Also, what we're going to take a look at is a Gen 4 SSD running in a Gen 3 slot and what that does to performance. So let's take a look at some numbers. Feel free to skip past this if you don't care about the nitty-gritty details, and you can just go to test results. So the new drive we're looking at is this Gen 4. Okay, this is a crucial drive. It's the P3 Plus 1 terabyte. And the reason I was looking at this drive, it has an insanely low price right now. It's $66 on Amazon. So when you look at the cost per gigabyte, you're down at 7 cents. Very, very inexpensive. And you can see the speeds here. Again, this is a Gen 4, but it's a slower drive. 5,000 read, 3,600 write. Now, if we look at the existing drive interface, right, what I have is a Gen 3. Those are about a gigabyte per second per lane, and there are 4 lanes. So when we look at that, you're maxing out this interface at about 3,600 read and maybe 3,300 write. Write's always slightly slower. Now, this interface was first available in 2015-ish when you look back at history, but really these drives didn't get more widespread until 2017 when the first Ryzen Zen processors, say the 1600s, first came out. You started to see a lot more of these drives spreading. And that's the case every time this advances. These specifications are announced years and years in advance. I think PCIe Gen 3 came out in 2010, and it took 7 years before it really had widespread adoption. 4 was the same. It was announced very far in advance. It didn't debut until Computex 2019, which is in May, late May, May 29th. And you didn't see the very first drives until September. More drives in 2020, September 2019. 2020, before you really saw any PCIe Gen 4 drives being widespread. Gen 5 is out now on the latest Ryzen 7000s and Intel processors, and that doubles the interface again. So you see this doubling every time. These first drives were just debuted at CES 2023 in January, and there are none on the market yet. There are no benchmarks, there are no reviews, because those drives are not in retail. So everything takes a while to get into the market. But you can see it's actually been a pretty rapid adoption here. Every couple of years, there's been a massive kind of doubling in this interface. And one could argue eventually you're going to hit performance limits. You won't really see a big jump in performance in your system. However, the jump into original NVMe here was huge. So I want to talk about that for a minute. When we look back, you can see original serial ATA, okay, the first drives, the old rotational drives, these maxed out at 150 megabytes per second on the interface, symmetrical-ish. So you can see the read and write speeds are pretty slow. Then serial ATA 2 came out and doubled that. Then serial ATA 3 came out and doubled that again. Now, this is the interface all of the drives being sold today are on. If they're an older serial ATA interface, they're all Gen 3. So you're maxing out at 600 megabytes per second, but in reality, the fastest drives are down somewhere around 550. That's the fastest that you can get. So obviously, jumping from that up to your M.2 slot, if your system has one, and it's running this PCIe Gen 3, that is a massive increase. So first recommendation, if you aren't running an M.2 and you have a slot in your system, you really should think about upgrading because this is a massive performance difference. It was also a massive performance difference originally jumping from 1 to 3. So if you happen to have one of these really old drives in your system just because you moved it across a couple desktops and it's an old data drive like mine was and I wasn't using it much, I didn't really notice how slow this was until I started benchmarking and looking at some of the data copy times going, wow, this is just getting so slow compared to my main system drive. And it really makes sense to look at what you can upgrade. Now the interesting thing is here. What if you don't have an M.2 slot? Or like me, your M.2 slot is occupied, and you still want to add another drive that's faster than serial ATA 3. If you have a PCIe short slot, a 4-lane, even if it runs at Gen 2, which mine does, you're still going to get somewhere around 1600 megabytes per second on that interface. So if you use an adapter and it has a Gen 3 or Gen 4 drive, it's going to just max out this interface. However, this is still going to be about 3 times faster than the fastest serial ATA 3 drives, which today, even those budget drives, even though they're inexpensive, they're still roughly the same price as the slower M.2 drives, the NVMe drives, that are Gen 3 or Gen 4. So wouldn't you want to get that speed increase if you can, and if you have a slot available? I wasn't even aware of this option until I started researching and talking to friends and realized, wow, you can just get an expansion slot. I'd never considered that. It worked great, and I'll talk about the test results as we get into that. So I'll talk about my rationale, which strictly was cost. Now, I want to identify with this particular drive a couple of things to think about. A lot of people talk about DRAM-less hard drives, and it is true that DRAM-less hard drives are slightly slower than the higher-end SSDs that incorporate their own RAM. This particular drive does not have DRAM, and it uses QLC instead of TLC, so basically a different form of NAND flash that's slightly higher capacity and slightly cheaper as a result. So this is a slower drive, and you can see that recorded here in the interface results. However, what does that mean for Gen 3? If we look here, here's the interface, 3600, 3300. This is the maximum that my system can do. 5000, 3600. If it can match up to these figures, this drive will run as fast as my system can go. So anything above that is lost until I do a system upgrade. Now, if you're planning to do a system upgrade in the next 6 or 12 months, it probably would make sense for you to buy a faster drive so that you can reuse it in the next system. I 100% intend to reuse this drive in my next system, but my upgrade won't be for a couple of years. So what's more than likely is this will become a secondary drive, and 2 years from now, everybody, I guarantee, is going to be buying a Gen 5 drive because they'll be out, they'll be everywhere, they'll be cheap. Those will be the drives to have for a system drive. This will end up becoming a backup drive or a data drive, which is still going to be plenty fast. Taking a look at the other popular Gen 4 drives in the market right now, you have things like the Samsung 990 Pro, which is a great drive with very fast speeds. But when you look at the price, literally $100 more expensive than this drive, almost triple in terms of cost. The SK Hynix P41 is another really popular drive, also great. Western Digital Black, the SN850X. These are all the drives that you see when you look at recommendations from a lot of the top tech websites of what is the fastest drive, what is the best SSD for my system. And it's true, these are great drives. The problem is the price and the cost for a budget or a mid-range system. If you're stuck back on Gen 3, you will never see these results. You will not be able to realize any of these speed benefits until you upgrade your system, until you upgrade your motherboard to one that has support for the newer interfaces. So again, this is something to take into account. If you intend to stick with Gen 3 for a while, don't overpay for a drive. You'll never see that performance increase. If you do intend to upgrade soon, hedge your bets because you're probably going to want one of these drives as soon as they become available. Now, I will say for this last choice, we can circle back to this. This is a Crucial P5 Plus. I almost went with this drive. And the reason is this is a TLC drive, so it has a better, higher performing flash, which you see resulting in the performance here. It also comes with a gig of DRAM, like many of the performance drives do. So instead of borrowing from your system, it actually has its own RAM and a higher endurance rating. And you can see the cost here is actually really attractive right now. It's 9 cents per gigabyte. It's a $90 drive. So compare that to $66 for the P3 Plus. This is a pretty attractive drive and one that would follow on nicely into a future system. But let's jump into the test results. So how did these drives perform? So this is the Crucial P3 Plus 1 terabyte. And this result is in the PCIe 2.0 adapter. Now, I bought this adapter for $6 on Amazon, literally $5.99 with tax. It is the board to do the adapter. It comes with a heatsink. It came with 3 heat tapes. It's surprisingly good for what it was. I only bought this adapter because I wanted to clone my drive. I wanted to be able to keep my system drive running, put the new drive in, do a direct clone, and just swap. Ease of use. With that said, now this adapter is residing in my system because I'm going to use my old drive as a secondary drive in that adapter. But you can see here from the results, we're basically maxing out this interface. Remember, looking right here, this is about the maximum speed that the Gen 2 can do, about 1600. And you're seeing here on the read and write, it's essentially maxing out that interface. Which is great. That's what we expected to see. This is a brand new drive, and this is how it would perform if it was left in a PCIe 3.0 system. Now I'm going to look here at Crystal Disk Info just to show some info on these drives. You can see this is the main drive in PCIe 3, so this is when it's plugged into the M.2 slot. You can see this is a great utility if you haven't used it. It shows you your power on hours. This is important for SSDs and tell you how old the drive is. If you're nearing any kind of failure, you can see this drive is still very good. It's rated at 99%. It hasn't had that many reads and writes since I bought the system. So this is the Samsung drive. And you can see the Crucial here plugged into the adapter is identifying as a PCIe 4.0 drive, but it's running in PCIe 2.0 mode. So 2 revisions back. And this is because, again, right now it's mounted in that adapter slot so that I can have two NVMe drives in my system at the same time. So in my case, the Crucial comes with Acronis cloning software. You have to have one Crucial drive in your system for this to boot, otherwise it won't activate. I will say I've used Macrium Reflect Free, I've used other tools. This one is surprisingly easy, and it came with the drive, so I gave it a shot and I was pretty pleased. You can see here remaining time 9 minutes. I think it was even faster than that. It was about 7 to copy everything from my main system drive, which was about 200 gigs of data, into the new Crucial drive in the PCIe 2.0 adapter. So the drive was slower than it would be normally. So no issues there. Once the drive was cloned, I was able to take the drives out and swap them. So what you see here is the Crucial running in the M.2 Gen 3 slot after it's been swapped in. And you can see here, this is the read speed, this is the write speed. And again, looking at the interface, we've essentially maxed out this interface. So this is the Gen 4 drive, which is rated for 3600, and it's performing in the Gen 3 slot essentially right at the maximums for this interface. So I was really happy with this result, because what this says is any more drive than this is completely wasted, once again, because the interface can't go any faster than this. And this drive was so inexpensive, I was a little worried it would actually be slower than the Evo Plus, than the Evo that I had. But it isn't. It completely maxes out the interface. It works great. It's a terabyte. I have much more expansion capability now. So again, just confirming here, it's the 4.0 drive running at PCIe 3 in the M.2 slot. Again, power on hours is 0 because it's just been inserted in the system. Something to talk about here for those who have Steam or are moving Steam libraries. It used to be a lot more difficult to move your Steam library. You had to use third-party utilities, or it was a little involved. Steam has a new utility built in, I don't know if people are aware of, that now you can just use from Steam, check all of your games, tell it the folder location where you want to move to. You have to add a drive and then shift to that Steam library, and then it moves it. So this was great. This is something I was not looking forward to, and it was actually super simple with the new tools. Now what you can see here is moving from my rotational drive over to the new M2 data partition. This speed, 108, is right about serial ATA1 speeds. So this was a really old drive. I didn't even realize that this wasn't, 2 or 3. It's just something I had carried over between a couple of systems. So this is about the speed that this was running at. I didn't load games from it. I didn't run the system from it. It was just a data storage drive for documents and files. It generally worked great for that. However, getting away from this and having that new storage is just going to be fantastic, because I don't have to micromanage where I'm placing things. So again, this took about half an hour to copy everything over. And I wanted to show from Resource Monitor here, this orange area. So again, we talked a little bit about what does host memory buffer mean. What it means is that drive uses a little bit of system memory all the time. So it's not a bad thing. If you have 16 gigs of memory like I do, you'll never notice it, or more. If you're running a system that has 4 or 8 gigs of memory, this might be something you want to avoid for this reason. You don't want to lose a gig of your system memory, or 500 megs, or whatever the case may be, because the drive will adjust based on your system memory. This may be a reason you'd want to go with a drive that has some of its own memory. However, again, in my case, and as the test results show, this didn't affect speed. The speeds are great. I will never notice this in practical use, so I just wanted to identify that I was able to see this in Resource Monitor, and it does show up on my system as using about a gig. It varies, but about a gig on average. Now what I did here at the end is I swapped over the Samsung 970 EVO into that PCIe 2 adapter. So you can see here, this is a PCIe 3 drive running in a PCIe 2 adapter slot. And what does that mean for speed? Again, we're basically maxing out that interface. This drive is obviously, actually for writes, this was the original speed. It was right around 1540 for writes, even in the M.2 slot. Now this drive is slower because it's a 250 gig. The drives actually speed up as you go up in capacity, so that's another reason to go for kind of a minimum of about a terabyte if you're going to buy an M.2 NVMe drive. The larger drives are faster. The smaller drives are slower. So my write speeds were always slower on this drive than they would have been on, say, a 970 EVO 1 terabyte. But in this case, I'll be able to continue running this drive in the adapter slot at these speeds, which is still, again, triple what the fastest serial ATA hard drives are. So that's my plan, is to continue using it this way. So just to flip over to the test results, and in summary here of what we've been talking about, here is the Samsung Evo plugged into the M.2. This was the test result. And again, those writes are a little slower because of the smaller drive. This is the Crucial P3 Plus in the M.2. Again, basically maxing out that Gen 2 interface. So paying for any more drive than this, if you have a Gen 3 motherboard, isn't going to buy you anything. If you do want to use a PCIe 2 adapter, I had good results. Both drives were basically able to max out that interface. Obviously, they could do more if they were placed into a different slot, but as a in-between strategy, in several cases, number one, cloning a drive like I was doing, this is a great option. You can stick your drive in, clone it, swap the drives. It's very simple. They have external enclosures as well, so if you don't care about using it internally, you can buy an external adapter and do the same thing. Another option is, what if you don't have an M.2 slot? A lot of old systems maybe only have PCIe slots. They don't have M.2. Or they have an M.2, but it's the old AHCI. It's the Serial 3 interface. It's slow. This is an option you can use to get a faster hard drive in your system in an expansion slot. And number three, just to harp again on that point, paying for more doesn't always make sense when you have a budget or mid-range system that can't take full advantage. This drive is one of the cheapest drives that I could find and is still maxing out the Gen 3 interface. So I'm very happy with this upgrade. Again, just to go back to some of the other options. Could you get these? Sure. Are they going to operate the same? Yes. They will work just fine. They'll be backwards compatible in your Gen 3 slot. You'll max it out with about the same figures. And then when you do have a future upgrade, you can use these in the new machine. So again, my recommendation, if you aren't using your M.2 slot and you have one, you absolutely should look into using it. If you don't have one, but you have PCIe expansion slots, either 2.0 or 3.0, look into getting an M.2 to NVMe, an adapter to that PCIe slot. It may be a great way for you to upgrade your system. Number three, if you plan to do an upgrade soon in the future, think about getting one of these drives, a newer Gen 4. Because you will see an improvement increase if you're going to jump to a Gen 4 motherboard in the next, say, 6 months. If, like me, you don't plan to upgrade for a year or two until the systems are much newer, you're going to be much better off waiting for these Gen 5 drives to come out, at which point you'll definitely want one of these. So again, if I was to do this again, I'm very happy with this upgrade. If you had a closer in upgrade, I would take a closer look at either the Crucial P5 Plus or the SN850X. I think both of those are really good prices at the moment. They're very fast drives. And the reality is you'll always be able to reuse these drives. Your future motherboards will probably have at least 2 M.2 slots. So you'll be able to run a Gen 5 drive as your main and then still use one of these as a backup. So again, I hope some of this has been useful. I know it's a lot of information and numbers, but I did want to talk through what does it mean to do more of a budget or a mid-range upgrade versus high-end. Talk about some of the real performance numbers, and also talk about the performance numbers of what these adapters look like, because I've seen a few of these and I've never seen a lot of comprehensive testing of how they work, what does the interface look like. So this is just to demonstrate what some modern Gen 3 and Gen 4 drives, how do those work in a PCIe 2.0 adapter. So thanks for listening to all that. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to comment and ask questions, and I can help if I can. Thanks a lot.